Welcome to the Ordinals Podcast, produced by Ord Media, featuring the top builders, projects, and investors pioneering Bitcoin inscription protocols and the future of digital artifacts.
Welcome, everyone, to the Ordinals Podcast. I'm your host, Ragnar Lifthrasir. We've got a really exciting episode today. We're going to be talking about one of the most exciting innovations and breakthroughs in Ordinals, that is recursive inscriptions. And we're also going to be talking about some very fundamental aspects of Ordinals, which is digital artifacts. We're really lucky to have Danny Yang with us today. He's a co-founder of On-Chain Monkeys, contributed to the protocol. So both from kind of a technical perspective and business perspective and art perspective even, I think he's a great asset to the community. So Danny, thanks for coming on the Ordinals Podcast.
Thanks, Ragnar. Great to be here and good to see you again.
You as well. You were one of the panelists at our Ordinals 2023 conference. You were on the protocol panel. You had some great insights there on the technical side. So really appreciate you there. Before we jump into our topics on recursive inscriptions, real quick, what was your takeaway from the Ordinals 2023 conference?
The takeaway was that we're quite early in this space, and there's lots of opportunity, and it is something meaningful. Basically, in this thing we'll talk about in this podcast too, basically a digital artifact, and what does it mean to have now a protocol for digital artifacts on Bitcoin? So I think that's kind of the takeaway: digital artifacts, and something significant is coming. But the market is still kind of trying to wrap their head around it.
Yeah, digital artifacts. I'm glad you said that. So, and again, before we jump into recursive inscriptions, let's just hit on that for a second. So, On-Chain Monkeys started on Ethereum. You guys are on Ordinals. What to you is the meaningful difference between a digital artifact versus an NFT?
Right. So NFT is very broad. It's like saying blockchain, right? It's like something that is crypto related, perhaps, like non-fungible token, the tokens being, crypto tokens. But it can be done in many different ways and also for many different applications. And digital artifact is a specific thing. So you could say NFT could be used to create a digital artifact, but not all NFTs are digital artifacts. And most people think of NFTs as Ethereum NFTs just because Ethereum has been kind of the chain with most of the NFT activity, and also the highest value NFTs so far. So Ethereum NFTs are actually a specific type of NFT. So Ethereum has their protocol for non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. It's called ERC 721. And what that actually is a protocol for basically trading of certificates. So you basically have a unique certificate that the blockchain, so Ethereum blockchain, says you own. And that certificate often is a pointer to either IPFS or to a centralized token URL that represents the thing that certificate. Basically, that certificate is that link, right? And so that is what people are trading on Ethereum. And when we talk about digital artifacts, we're actually not talking about certificates anymore. We're actually talking about the digital thing. So, for example, Bitcoin, what you own is the actual digital thing. Like the ownership of a Bitcoin is the digital thing on the Bitcoin blockchain. It is native to the Bitcoin. Same with Ethereum, right? When you own Ether, it's represented in the ledger of Ethereum. It's a digital thing. It's not a certificate pointing somewhere else. So digital artifacts are basically, digital goods or things that are actually, native to the chain that they're on, that you actually, have custody of, and they have certain properties. So actually, Casey Rodarmor, when he, came up with, Ordinals, the protocol, he wrote out, he defined certain properties of what he thought a digital artifact should have, and actually, they actually are pretty good. But basically, the way to think about it in terms of physical artifacts versus digital artifacts is really, a digital artifact is just a physical artifact that can be represented all in the native chain that it's on, but with an extra property that actually not even true of a physical artifact, and that is immutable. Mm-hmm. So when you have a digital artifact, it cannot be changed. Even if you sell it or transfer to someone else, that digital artifact is that digital artifact. You can't modify it. It's immutable. I mean, that's not even true of physical artifacts, because if I bought a painting, yes, I own it, and no one else can like take it from me or change it, but I can change it, right? I can like spray paint over it, right? And or rip it up or burn it, right? So that's actually a cool thing about digital artifacts, that they're immutable.
I love that.
Yeah,
Immutable. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And the fact that it's immutable, but it's immutable, which is so powerful, yet it doesn't mean it's static. It doesn't mean it can't become dynamic. Right. And with this recursive inscriptions, I mean, it really sort of opened up the door to build upon this immutability and in the fact that you completely own it, yet it's not like this stone carving sitting right in a cave. It's just kind of, that's it. You're done with your inscription and there's no future for it. Really exciting. So just for people listening, I'll just like a one sentence summary that I read on OKX. They said recursive inscriptions represent a transformative breakthrough for Bitcoin digital artifacts by pushing the boundaries of ordinal inscriptions. They offer developers a powerful tool to create networks of interconnected data sources. So, Danny, kind of in your own words, what are recursive inscriptions in kind of plain language?
Yeah. So recursive inscriptions. So actually one thing, so just going back to just, like NFTs on Bitcoin versus NFTs on Ethereum, and, basically digital artifacts on Bitcoin versus digital artifacts on Ethereum, because you can actually have digital artifacts on Ethereum too. It's just that the protocol isn't very native, or rather the protocol doesn't support it natively. So you have to kind of work around it and do extra work to kind of, support that. And that's actually what we did, actually 2 years ago when we launched On-Chain Monkey as a digital artifact on Ethereum, because, Bitcoin Ordinals didn't exist then. We made it in a way that had all the properties that Casey wanted in a digital artifact, and it was on Ethereum. And the market didn't really understand that. We actually we have done pretty well over the 2 years, and so people do appreciate what we've done. But in general, the greater Ethereum market didn't understand that aspect of the On-Chain Monkey digital artifact on Ethereum. Many people still think of it as monkey JPEGs, and we I think got that criticism even on Bitcoin when we actually created on Bitcoin. They're thinking oh, you're polluting Bitcoin with monkey JPEGs. But so going back to how's that tying with recursive inscription? So this is actually the beauty of Bitcoin Ordinals, in that the design of these inscriptions is it's designed around basically how you would consume it or view it. So these digital artifacts are very much basically web native, as in your web browser basically is the consumer of it or the client of it, right? So so that's why like the early inscription, the early ones were JPEGs, but it was browsers can render it. It was very natural to just display that digital artifact, right? That image. And then because it's so browser native, then some people also wrote HTML, right? And then that also displayed. And this was already planned by Casey because he supported MIME type, so you could have basically HTML inscriptions, and that was really nice. So the browser would just open it, and you would see basically whatever the HTML did. And in that HTML, you can also have JavaScript, which is one of the most well known and popular programming languages. So that adds a lot of power to an inscription. Okay, so this is kind of the setup for inscriptions, but still they're just single inscriptions. There's no recursion yet, right?
Yeah.
So now enter recursion. This was also the kind of long-term plan that Casey had in mind when he was designing this, right? He brought this up, I think, either in December or November last year, but the implementation of the protocol wasn't ready yet. So, and I guess people didn't think that was possible. It also, you have to kind of wrap your head around this, because digital artifacts is already confusing enough. So what's it even mean to have recursive digital artifacts? But what recursion is going back to the kind of the web example. It's like you could actually have basically links to other inscriptions, like a web page. You can link to other web pages, or pull in web pages into your web page when you kind of display it. So that's what you could do with recursion, in that, because it's all, but these links are not like certificates like Ethereum where you point off chain to somewhere else. They're actually all native on chain on Bitcoin. So they're basically links to other artifacts, and it's a way to also build new artifacts from other artifacts. So basically, in that sense, recursion also allows building blocks, which is very powerful. It's actually the proper term would be composability. So basically, you have composability with the Bitcoin Ordinals protocol. And so you can basically compose new inscriptions or new digital artifacts from previous ones. And because it's an open, blockchain, and everything on Bitcoin is transparent and available for everyone, whenever someone creates an inscription or a digital artifact, it could be used to create new ones. Everyone can actually use them to create new ones. So it's actually a very powerful system.
That's a good point, that other people can build on them, right? Because art, great artists build on the shoulders of other great artists. There's always something new, but it's also built on something else. And so we see that if any art history class 101, that's what you learn about, art over time. And so it's kind of exciting then to see, like I can build back on Chain Monkey, or I could build back on Casey's original, right, inscription, number 01. And so it kind of opens up so many new things that we can go through it. So you talked about, I like how you said that you said something about connect artifact to artifact. So it's not just like IPFS links to IPFS links to things off chain. It's all linking to things on chain.
Yeah. And also that linkage is a citation, you could say. So if someone creates a great piece of work, whether art or code or whatever it is, and a lot of people use it in future inscriptions, right? It's all on chain. Like those links, those citations are on Bitcoin itself, so people can actually explore those, and basically the ones that are linked a lot, they actually will have a lot of weight and have more significance, right? Like if you create like the most cited or most recursed. I don't know what word we want to use for it. But
got to invent a new word.
It's actually significant, right? Like this inscription is used a lot, over the years, and this is like forever, right? Like it's not just like this next month, but some inscriptions might be used over and over for 100 years, down the line, because of the kind of permanence and immutability of these things.
That's a good point. So now, in terms of values of specific inscriptions, now there's another dimension to the value of, besides maybe just if it's art, the look, or if it's music, the sound, or if it's code, the innovation of the code, but how often people built on it, which to me is really great value, because it's an objective way to measure value, to say that there was 100 different pointers to this inscription, or 1,000, or whatever it might be. That's meaningful. That's like crowdsourced value right there. So I think when people inscribe, you do bring up that good point. When they inscribe something, they might think, maybe I should really inscribe something that everyone else could benefit from and use. Do you see that as a value there for that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, when we inscribed OCM dimensions, so that was I think this 3D work that we launched, that we officially launched, June 15th, so pretty recently. But we actually inscribed that work in February, way before people were thinking about recursion. Although we were trying to, like, we were telling people about it, but it was just the market wasn't ready for it. But we actually inscribed a compression library, and we inscribed 3.js, which is a very commonly used 3D rendering library for web applications, and even for art. Like, for example, art blocks. Many generative artists on Ethereum who use art blocks, they use 3.js. Also P5.js, we also inscribe that library. So these are inscribed on Bitcoin, and people are starting to use them. So you basically, you don't have to inscribe it again, because these libraries are rather large, and you just reference it with your when you inscribe your work that creates, let's say, generative art using the library, you can just reference the previous library that was inscribed. And we actually published a GitHub repo that lets you do that, or rather has a little command that lets you set it up automatically and describes how you could do it to use the previous inscription. So that's a power of recursion to use libraries.
And when you guys did that, was it you knew that in the future other people could refer to those and reuse those at the time? You knew that, or was this something you just did for dimensions? Okay.
We knew recursion was going to be an important feature on Bitcoin. Just the protocol wasn't ready yet for it. So we inscribed it.
When you say wasn't ready, Can you help people understand
good point.
that it wasn't ready?
So
Yeah.
the product, so for the protocol to work, you need people to kind of have standards. Like recursion, you need standards for how do you reference other inscriptions. So that wasn't set yet in February. So we inscribed things like these libraries, and waiting for basically the standards to be kind of set and adopted. And so as soon as that I forget the exact issue, but there was an issue that described this. And it's so how do you do recursion was now it's settled where we use this /content/inscription ID, right? So that was not ready in February, but we knew that would be ready at some point in time. Basically, the reference. How do you reference another inscription inside of your inscription? So we inscribed these inscriptions that we knew will be used when we could reference them.
Okay, yeah, because Casey, I can't remember if it was Raf who actually did it, but yeah, it was Casey who did that. He enabled that. Is a very simple thing that he enabled, and then that sort of kicked it off. But that's interesting. I wonder how many other people, knew about that possibility. Were you talking about this functionality with other teams or other people? Or was it just kind of the OCM team that you guys were talking to?
Oh no, it's actually on GitHub. I can find the GitHub issue. So we started this GitHub issue in February. And let me just find the link.
Yeah, so you were saying, so from February is when you kind of brought it up. You guys were doing it for OCM, and then it took a few months to get there, and then in June is when they actually pushed that up that they needed to.
Yeah, I shared this link, and I don't know if it'll show up later in our podcast, but if you scroll down, you can see the references. Issue 1082 is recursion. So that link is broken because the KC's GitHub was changed to Ordinals. So you have to actually change KC to Ordinals in that link. And then you'll see that was an issue from December 23, actually. Yeah, 2022.
Okay.
Issue 1082. But our issue that we started was issue 1647 back in February 10. We started at February 10. So we knew it was coming, and we inscribed these libraries too for the when we could actually use it in the way that everyone also will use it, versus like doing it our way and then the market doesn't adopt it and it's fragmented. So and we're still going through that, like the org, and we've been talking to the org team throughout to make sure that we all do things properly so that we can grow the whole ecosystem, right, in a maximally beneficial way for everyone.
So you guys inscribed those in February, those libraries. So besides the ones in February, have you guys inscribed any other libraries or anything else that other people can build upon?
Those are the main ones because they're like for generative art. We've been working on, and we like the OCM Dimensions collection that we launched in June. It also, so recursion obviously was kind of the big thing that I think many people can benefit. But there are also some things that are kind of interesting that we did that are not quite standard yet. Like we also did basically an on-chain reveal. So that actually is an interesting thing that even though the inscriptions are immutable, so each of the dimensions is immutable, we were able to do a reveal, as in when people first got their dimension, when they bought it, it's immutable, as we say, but it was not set as in which dimension. So it's a collection, right? It's a collection of 300, and each one is unique, but you didn't actually know which one you got yet. And then we did a reveal, and all on chain too, and we proved that it was a fair and random reveal, so no one had any special like everyone got one that was a random one, and so that was actually cool. And that, so this is kind of also where I think you're saying, even though it's immutable, you can still do some things that are kind of dynamic and like unexpected. So we had this immutable collection that had a reveal that then locked in which one you got, and how that worked was that inside. So we used recursion for that. So in the recursion, there it pointed to an inscription that had not been revealed yet. So it pointed to an inscription ID that didn't exist.
Hmm.
It will exist in the future. Basically, when we did the reveal, when we set the transaction to create that inscription, then it suddenly revealed itself. So there was basically a state change in our inscription. In our immutable inscription, we had a state change, which is a pretty cool function. And I think more people will start doing things like that with inscriptions too, to add some
Now,
sort of dynamic,
so the
mechanism
way
in
you
there.
guys did that, you said is that's not there's not sort of a consensus agreed upon standard to do that,
Oh no, so
or is
actually it was. So
okay?
we there's going to be in the future what we did in that example. It'll be easier ways to do it, but we did it in a way that wasn't an agreed upon standard, and that we only used the recursion method, which is the /content inscription ID. So that was what was decided basically June 15th. Like the June 15th was when Ordinals.com said, here's the release of /content /inscription ID. Like this is a new endpoint for recursive inscriptions, and that's actually what we use. So we were waiting for that consensus, and then we launched, and we used it in a way that also was as novel in that we weren't just using it to just point to an existing inscription. We used it to point to a future inscription. So that inscription that we point to in the recursion actually didn't exist yet, which is kind of the very cool thing. We actually used recursion on an inscription that was to be created in the future. So that's how we could do that state change. So even though the dimensions that you got is immutable, the recursive call is something that will change. As in, it could change only once because it changed from non-existing to existing. So it basically went from a null value to the actual inscription, recursive inscription call. So that was a way to do state change using the existing framework. But there's going to be a new framework, or rather a new endpoint that will come out for. There are going to be a few more endpoints that will be supported in Ordinals protocol over the next few months that actually will add also even more power, or rather simplicity. Like the thing we just described is actually kind of hard to do. Like to set up an inscription that hadn't happened yet. It takes some technical, I guess, know-how and also some extra work. And also, if you screw up, you screw up, and there's no, because it's immutable.
Yeah.
If you got the transaction ID wrong, that future inscription reveal would just not work. So like everyone just owns a blank inscription. So that
I was
would have
going to
been
ask you, this is a dumb question, but how could you point it to something that didn't exist? I mean, I'm sure this is a dumb question, but how could you do that?
It's not dumb at all. It's actually very tricky. It takes some like Bitcoin knowledge to understand why that was possible and what is possible. So the inscription ID is unique. So you can, and there's a commit reveal scheme. That's how Casey designed this using Taproot. So you can't just once you set an inscription ID, which is what we set in the the dimension, it had an inscription ID of something that's in the future. So you can't pick anything, because if you pick anything, there's no way you can create that inscription ID, because it's like trying to find a hash of something, and it's just impossible. You have no computational power is big enough to do that. So we had to have created the inscription just internally first, so that we know we can get that inscription ID in the commit and reveal. But we don't send out that transaction into the blockchain yet. So in terms of the public side of Bitcoin, it doesn't exist yet. But we know that it can exist in the future. So that's how so basically it's something we have not revealed yet, but we know that we could reveal it, and that when we do reveal it, it'll be that inscription ID, and that's what we use in the recursive call. So then it's basically so that's kind of the future inscription that doesn't exist yet. We call it in our recursive inscription, and then we can choose when to release that inscription, and then that's when we have the state change,
and then how do you release it? Sorry, so then how do you release it? What is the inscription that you have to do to reveal that?
So then it's to actually so you can actually create an inscription without sending it to the network, right? So we release it by sending it to the network.
Okay.
Yeah, and then when it's mined, then it will reveal the transaction.
Very interesting. Now you talked about other endpoints. So what do you mean there's going to be other endpoints?
Yeah, so I think since the recursive call one was added, we've already added a few. I think a block hash endpoint and block height and a couple of those have been added. So endpoints, basically Bitcoin endpoints that point to other parts of the Bitcoin network. And so then you can actually easily call those inside of an inscription. And some of these endpoints can be very powerful, just like the endpoint for recursion right now is the /content inscription ID. So being able to address the inscription ID is very powerful. A few more endpoints that are related to Bitcoin also are very powerful. Yeah, and in a sense, basically Bitcoin Ordinals becomes like a very cool Bitcoin explorer. People can really do interesting Bitcoin related things too inside the Ordinal infrastructure. In fact, it's like Ordinals is like the ultimate Bitcoin explorer almost once these other endpoints are in.
That's interesting because different like block heights. So I think I saw one that was going to the art change based on the block height. So what would be an example of a couple of these endpoints, and why would you want to use this? So let's say there's a specific block height. Like, why would that matter? What can I do with that I can't just, like, what would you do with these endpoints that you can't do in some other way, like say an inscription ID?
Yeah. So you can do different types of, I guess, dynamic NFTs. I described the one where we could change it once by sending out, for each inscription ID, we can make a change. So without adding these new endpoints, if you want to have a bunch of different changes, then you have to have a bunch of different reveals. So yeah, you could say it that way. But with some of these endpoints, you could just have them change, basically on a certain, basically tailored to that endpoint. So like block height or something could be that. Yeah.
So you could set something up for years in advance, in theory, right? I mean, if you know the block height in 20 years.
Yeah, and something will change, that art. Yeah, if we're focused on art, there could be art like that where, it's one thing up till now, and then, in 20 years, it'll change to something else.
Yet it's still immutable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. So we talked about art. I think art is what a lot of people think of with inscriptions. It's visual. People appreciate that. So besides art, like the art changing, the image changes, what about non sort of art things? Maybe it's code, maybe it's something else. Can we enable some sort of smart contracts with this?
Yes. So we were just talking about the fact that you can do state changes in the artifact. So basically that is a type of smart contract. It's different from Ethereum, where the smart contract is evaluated by the native chain. So this is actually code that's evaluated, you could say, by the client, but the code and the state is kind of agreed upon though by the network. So there's going to be some cool things there. Also, you even think in terms of just code, one of the things about like recursive inscriptions is you're really building out kind of like a decentralized GitHub repository, but it's even more than that. In that we were talking about earlier how this is like something that long lasting, and you can see the references that other people have towards yours. So it's like with citations, like GitHub, also with citations, but it's also you're actually running the code because the actual applications are also in the same platform, because like the dimensions is code. It has code for other code like libraries, but it's also the application where you run it and you see the 3D art, right? It's a 3D thing that's actually rendered, in your browser from the Satoshi too, from Bitcoin. So it's like all in one. It's like both decentralized GitHub, like citation, like historic record, but also the actual application too. So I think that would get more developed over time, and we'll see some very cool future things.
Yeah, I know with Ethereum, they try to call it the world computer, right? And it's done some cool things, but now with Ordinals, you can see how Bitcoin being a very basic world computer, where now you're running code, you have references to things, right? You have pointers, you have reveals, I mean, to what extent do these recursive inscriptions enable more of like a world computer type functionality, or is that overselling it?
I think it's slightly different. I think it's just what do you think the world computer is? Because even like Ethereum, people talk a lot about Turing complete. I actually don't think that's that important. In fact, like the applications that are built on Ethereum that create the most value are really ERC20 and ERC721, and the stuff around those. So it's actually just certain applications are actually very valuable, for Ethereum, and then for Bitcoin, there will be also applications that people build on top of Ordinals that will be very valuable. And right now we don't know what they are, but we do know that there's actually a lot of power in this new protocol that's still not finalized yet. As in the specifications are pretty final, but the implementation of the protocol is still being worked out. That's why we have cursed inscriptions and some of these other things that are still basically they're there because it's not finalized yet. But then after it is, then what could you do with it? It's actually pretty broad. There's a lot of things that are being created, and some of them are around applications, and these applications, there could be some very valuable killer applications on Bitcoin that no one has thought of yet.
I like that you said that no one has thought of yet, because obviously you've done some innovative things. You talk to other innovators, probably publicly in a Twitter space or GitHub, and in privately as well. So you probably have a couple of ideas what can be done, but I think you're also saying you don't know, and there's things that we are going to find out. And I think that's really exciting, because I know you've been in Bitcoin for a while, and that hasn't been the case with Bitcoin. Bitcoin kind of became stale if you're a builder, and some would argue, well, Bitcoin isn't supposed to be exciting. It's just supposed to be digital gold, and sort of that's it. And if you try to make it exciting, now you're adding complexity and fragility and bloat and such. But actually, this is kind of exciting, that there's going to be new things we don't know. And one of my favorite things about Bitcoin and Ordinals is this idea of censorship resistance. I really like inscriptions that also have meaning in terms of withstanding censorship, because we talked about digital artifacts, and we know that like human artifacts over time, different political regimes don't like certain human artifacts. Some have been hidden, some have been reinterpreted, different religious political orders. So how do you see recursive inscriptions and maybe other things helping with this censorship resistance that maybe you can't quite do in Ethereum or as well? So how does this bolster Bitcoin's supposed strength of censorship resistance and maybe even immutability?
Yeah, well, I think these are two of the properties that are like censorship resistance and immutability that are core to a digital artifact. So just by design, the Ordinals protocol is that. But going back to this, I think the important point of Bitcoin has its properties actually because it's quite simple. Bitcoin, so not the Ordinals protocol, but the Bitcoin protocol is a very elegant one that has withstood the years. So far it's the longest lived blockchain, and it's still very true to the original Bitcoin white paper. And the upgrades have added just moderate complexity to it. Bitcoin is still very simple. And the stuff we're talking about with Bitcoin Ordinals is actually not changing the Bitcoin core protocol at all. It's actually very much the same protocol for Bitcoin, but this is just in fact, this is also why Bitcoin Ordinals is so elegant too, in that the Bitcoin Ordinal basically is the Bitcoin protocol, but just another lens of how you look at the Bitcoin protocol. So it's really the same as Bitcoin protocol, but just kind of lens of how you interpret, Bitcoin. And I think that's actually an important but very nuanced point about the Ordinals protocol, because it's really the Ordinals protocol is just Bitcoin, just how you view Bitcoin. And so this also goes to censorship resistance, right? So, there are some things people don't want to see, so then you don't have to look at it, but it's still there, right? So for everyone who wants to see it, you can't take it off. It's there. But if it's like, let's say it's illegal or something, then you just the option is really to not look at it, but you can't remove it. That's just because it's just already part of Bitcoin, unless you change Bitcoin itself. you're not going to be able to, basically change that part of it. So you really have to change Bitcoin. So if you think Bitcoin is secure and censorship resistant, then Ordinals will be too. So it just comes down to actually Bitcoin.
Yeah, I like how you said that it's just Ordinals is just Bitcoin. And I like how you described it as a lens of how you view Bitcoin. And that's a good point. For me, I'm very much like a privacy conscious person. And one of the criticisms of Bitcoin has always been that it's really not truly fungible. Like, whereas Monero, that's a lot more fungible, and why I really like Monero. And it was the only other crypto I've used besides Bitcoin up until I was Bitcoin only up until like maybe 2 years ago. And then I started with Monero, 3 years ago with Monero, and then 2 years ago with Stacks approximately. And that is a fair criticism of Bitcoin, but that it's not, UTXO model, right? And just the structure, it's not. But it actually has now, in a way, become a strength, because if each Satoshi is different and you have the UTXO model, well, wait a minute, now we can do things that we couldn't do, or at least there's a new understanding of what that Satoshi is.
Exactly. And it is the UTXO model that enables Ordinals. Ordinals is just, Ordinal theory is just, UTX is based on the UTXO model. So yeah, that's exactly your argument that it's a strength. And that's why Ordinals is possible. And then for privacy, then, there are other privacy solutions, even for Bitcoin. You can have a privacy on top of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin by design it's public and not private. And the tokens by design are, you could say non-fungible, but you can, make them fungible, and that works, right? Bitcoin works over the years as a fungible, token, but also you can do the non-fungible thing.
Yeah, with like Samurai Whirlpool, and obviously Sparrow Wallet now uses Whirlpool, and so you can have that privacy. But yeah, going back to Bitcoin, one of the strengths of Bitcoin was supposed to be that has the network effect. It's the most used cryptocurrency, but it's been a struggle over the years to get Bitcoin adoption to be used as money. And as you're well aware, and so it's been kind of a struggle to sort of get that adoption for Bitcoin as our money. But what's interesting now about the UTXO model and then Ordinals, it actually has helped create more of a Bitcoin circular economy that simply wouldn't be possible, like say with Monero. I mean, there's ways to do it, but Bitcoin really has, with Ordinals, has enabled now this new Bitcoin economy, right? Which means on chain, you really don't need these fiat off ramps and on ramps. You really don't need custodians to do all this. You can just keep your inscriptions in your wallet. You can keep your Bitcoin in your wallet. Maybe you can kind of give your comments on that idea of sort of a new sort of Bitcoin circular economy enabled by Ordinals.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for an ecosystem to really grow, you need an economy in that ecosystem. And Bitcoin actually, like how Bitcoin grew was really that it was the kind of the base cryptocurrency that was used to trade other cryptos on other blockchains through centralized exchanges. But then Ethereum came around and people realized, well, you can actually do all the basically on Ethereum, you can natively trade all the different cryptos, right, on ERC20s and then ERC721s. So that has been missing in Bitcoin, and now we have that with the Ordinals protocol, where you have digital artifacts and you can trade basically just like what you saw on Ethereum. So this is going to be, I think, very, very promising for Bitcoin and the Bitcoin economy. Both on chain, and then also it grows off chain eventually, but definitely you need this on chain part.
Yeah, and I like the reminder that every inscription has like this padding of Satoshis, and so not only are you getting an inscription, but you're getting a small amount of Bitcoin as well, which is pretty neat. We only have a little bit of time left, so I do also want to talk about maybe some challenges. So what are some challenges you see right now to either recursive inscriptions or the next kind of thing facing at least ordinal theory? What are you seeing in terms of challenges right now?
Yeah, I think it's one around education. We brought in some new people into Bitcoin, so that's great, but many do not understand the UTXO model or Bitcoin. So educating them on Bitcoin, and that's good. But then Ordinals itself, many people come from the Ethereum NFT ecosystem, so they don't actually know the difference between what we were talking about earlier, a digital artifact and an Ethereum NFT, and that's actually a really important point. So I think it's basically around educating on what is an ordinal. Then then after that, it's like what digital artifacts and what's a ordinal inscription, or rather recursive inscription, and then the other things you could do with it. But yeah,
good point.
education.
Yeah, education. And just, I'm glad that we started the conversation off talking about digital artifacts, kind of relaying that foundation to people instead of jumping right into it. Because if not, then you forget the difference between an NFT and an inscription, UTXO model, versus an account model. And so that's a good fundamental thing. And like, on-chain monkey, you guys, have a strong community, go back a little ways. At Ordinals 2023, I saw the crowd there. Right, very enthusiastic. And so have you seen it in the OCM community? You guys started on Ethereum. Can you talk about kind of that community learning about Bitcoin? I'm sure plenty of them were Bitcoin OGs, but what about kind of people from there now in Bitcoin?
Yeah, in fact, we had a mix. It's a pretty diverse community. Some didn't have any Bitcoin. So when we did OCM Dimensions, some people had to buy Bitcoin for the first time to be able to mint that, because that was a Bitcoin mint. So yeah, and we've been also, educating our community about the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum, the pros and cons, because, Ethereum has its pros too. So kind of what are the, good things about each chain, and the differences. But we are moving, or allowing all our Ethereum NFTs to be moved to Bitcoin, and to really be like, Bitcoin ordinals and digital artifacts. Although when we launched on Ethereum, as I mentioned earlier, OCM Genesis was a digital artifact already, but even that move to Bitcoin, I think it's a new digital artifact on Bitcoin that has its own properties that are native to Bitcoin. That I think most people will actually want to move over there, move from Ethereum to Bitcoin, especially the high value digital assets, high value digital artifacts. I think Bitcoin would be the more secure chain, most secure chain for that.
Absolutely. And leading that, I think we'll finish off with my favorite question that I ask guests, because you brought up, value and people wanting to go to Bitcoin from Ethereum. So my final question to you, Danny, is do you own an inscription or multiple inscriptions that you would never sell, you would never transfer? And if so, why?
Yeah, well, OCM Dimension, I think that one, I think has a lot of, like technical innovation and historic significance, created back in February, and kind of, pioneered many of these techniques of, recursion being one, but, like this idea of the reveal and using this, change of state, these are all pretty new concepts on Bitcoin. So, and the art is cool. I mean, I like the 3D art of Dimensions.
Yeah, at high fidelity, right? And even with the file size, you can still get these 3-dimensional rich visuals. So that's a great answer. I mean, you love what you build, so that's the real key there. Appreciate Danny coming on the Ordinals podcast. So where can people find you and then OCM?
Yeah, so my Twitter is Danny Upside Down. So it's HUUEP at Twitter. Or I guess it's X now, but and On-Chain Monkey, that's also the other account that our project is on Twitter.
Perfect. Well, Danny, thanks for coming to Ordinals 2023 conference and also the Ordinals podcast. Looking forward to what you guys are going to keep building on, and we'll see what these innovations are that you alluded to that we still don't know. So again, Danny, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please rate and review our show. Subscribe to the Ordinals Podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or your favorite app, and follow us on Twitter at the OrdPod. Drop us a line at podcast@ord.media for topics you'd like us to cover or guests you'd like us to interview. Ordinals 2024 conference is taking place in Nashville. Early bird passes are available now. Visit ord.media and sign up for our newsletter. Thanks for listening to the Ordinals Podcast, produced by Ord Media.